We've all done it. We scroll right past pages of fine print and click, I agree. But what happens when a company tells you one thing to your face and then tries to hide behind a disclaimer when it turns out they were flat out lying? Well, today we're going to dig into a huge case that deals with exactly that tension between what someone says, what they really mean, and what the law says they are on the hook for.
So let's just cut right to it. Can you actually get away with fraud just by adding a little no responsibility clause at the end? I mean, it's a huge question, and it really gets to the heart of what trust means in the business world. The answer, as you'll see, teaches a pretty powerful lesson about both ethics and the law. All right, so our story starts with a classic business problem. We've got a group of sellers who have to decide if they can trust a new customer, and there is a lot of money hanging in the balance. So on one side, you have R.H. Brown & Company, a group of wool growers. They've got a product, and they've got a potential new client who wants to buy a ton of it. But here's the catch. The client wants to buy it all on credit, and nobody really knows if they're good for it. For the wool growers, this is a massive gamble. I mean, if this new client flakes, they could lose a fortune. So what do you do in a situation like that? You do your homework, right? The wool growers made a really smart move. They went to their own bank and basically said, hey, can you guys look into the finances of this potential buyer for us? They needed an expert opinion from someone they could trust.
Now, how they got this information is a really critical detail here. The communication wasn't direct. It went through this chain, and that adds a whole other layer to the story that's super important.
And this just lays it out perfectly. The wool growers ask their bank for help. Their bank then calls up the buyer's bank, the commercial banking company of Sydney, to get a reference. So think about that. The crucial report, the one piece of info this entire deal depends on, is coming from the buyer's own bank. So now we get to the real heart of the matter. The buyer's bank responds, and what they say, and maybe more importantly, what they don't say, is what turns this whole thing from a standard business deal into a massive legal case. On the surface, the report they send back sounds amazing. The bank says their client is, quote, considered safe for ordinary business commitments. Now, if you're the wool growers, you're probably breathing a huge sigh of relief, right? I mean, hearing that from another bank, that's about as big a green light as you can get.
But then comes the fine print. Tacked on to the end of this glowing review, the bank adds this little disclaimer. They're basically saying, look, here's our great opinion of our client, but just so you know, if you act on it and everything goes sideways, it's not our problem. It's like they were trying to give advice and wash their hands of it at the exact same time.
And this is where the story gets really crazy. You see this huge gap between what the bank said and what they actually knew. While they were calling their client safe, the reality was the client was drowning in debt and constantly going over their overdraft limit. The bank painted this picture of financial stability when they knew for a fact that the situation was incredibly shaky. This wasn't just a simple mistake. It was a deliberate, calculated misrepresentation.
So what happens when you make a huge business decision based on a complete lie? Well, exactly what you'd expect. The consequences were direct, and for the wool growers, they were absolutely devastating. So based on the bank's reassuring report, R.H. Brown & Company, they went all in. They extended the credit, they shipped the wool, they did the deal, believing they had done their due diligence and that their investment was totally secure. And then the other shoe dropped. Just as the hidden fact suggested, the buyer couldn't pay their bills. They defaulted on the payment, and just like that, the wool growers were left with a massive financial loss. The very risk they tried so hard to avoid had become a reality, all because they trusted a report that was built on a lie. Well, of course, this whole thing ended up in court. The wool growers sued the bank, saying, hey, you're responsible for our loss. The bank, in its defense, just pointed to its disclaimer, probably thinking they were in the clear. But the court had a very different take on things. See, the case really came down to the legal definition of deceit, or, fraud. And it's not just about telling a fib. It's about knowingly making a false statement, intending for someone else to act on it, and then that person actually suffers because of it. You need all three of those pieces, and they were all right here. The court saw right through the bank's flimsy defense. They ruled that the statement wasn't just careless, it was fraudulent. The bank knew the information was false, and they gave it out fully expecting the wool growers to rely on it. And when faced with that kind of deliberate lie, the court decided that the disclaimer was completely worthless. You just can't use fine print to get out of jail free for fraud. And this right here is the powerful, simple principle that came out of this whole case. A disclaimer might,
might protect you from an honest mistake, but it offers you zero protection when you intentionally set out to deceive someone. Honesty is not optional, and you can't use legal jargon to dodge it.
This old case really forces us to look at our world today, right? We are constantly clicking "I agree" on pages and pages of terms and conditions we'll never, ever read. But this case is a powerful reminder that beyond all that legal language, there's a basic, fundamental expectation of good faith. And it kind of leaves us with a big question. In a world that's just swimming in disclaimers, how do we make sure that the spirit of honesty and not just the letter of the law is what's guiding us? Definitely something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.